All right, everyone. Welcome back. I'm very loud on this thing. I think you all know that the restrooms are just outside of these doors and the snacks are out here. But we're going to get this panel started. This is such a great panel. We have here Anthony Grover, Dean of Admissions here at BYU Law School, and Isabel Moreno, the Director of Admissions at the U of U Law School. And I have some questions that they'll hopefully answer for you. And if we have time in the end, we might take questions from you, but we'll see. We have some pretty good questions. So we're going to start by talking about the application process. What are the most common mistakes that applicants make during the JD application process, in your opinions?
Sure. So I'm sure if we take the collective of, but first of all, good morning, everyone. I'm Isabel Moreno, Director of Admission and Financial Aid. I'm so happy to be here. This is one of my favorite events during this cycle. Or this part of the year. And I want to applaud you being here on a Friday morning and just, taking in all the wealth of knowledge. But to address the question, I think if we were to take the collective of all the mistakes, the list would be tremendously long. But that's not, usually those mistakes I see are frankly because folks are not taking the time to read the instructions. And as I spoke to some of you this morning, that's a missed opportunity for you, right? Because thinking about the application process, I realize it's pretty streamlined. That's very true. But to suggest that we're evaluating applications with the same prism is a total missed opportunity for you and just rubber stamping, right? Basically, what I mean by that is I've already put my application materials for School A. I'm just recycling those materials and using them with School B, C, and D when you're not taking the time to really just at least skimming the instructions, because we might be able to provide guidance there that you're not taking into account. So I'll start with that. Dean Grover?
Yeah, likewise, thank you for being here this morning. It's a pleasure for us here at BYU Law School to host UCLE and you all as part of this event. As Director Moreno mentioned, this is kind of one of the highlights of the admissions calendar each year. Yeah, follow the instructions. It seems pretty simple, but you'd be shocked at how many people don't do that. And I would add, there are specific instructions for each school for a reason. Those aren't just random instructions that we provide. So take the time to make sure that each application you submit comports with that specific school's requirements. I'd also add to that at times I think there are applicants who are maybe writing what they think schools want to hear and don't feel like you need to do that. Be your authentic self. We're not looking for a one-size-fits-all applicant here at the law school, and I think every law school would say the same thing. Don't feel like you have to have majored in a certain area to be a compelling applicant, and just be your authentic self and let us know about who you are through that application.
Great. So how about recommendation letters? What should applicants look for in their recommenders?
So again, this I think goes to the instructions. So at our law school at BYU, we ask and prefer that there be 2 letters of recommendation, and we really do specify that they be academic references, meaning that they be from professors who have had you in an academic setting. Now, why is that important? Why do we ask for that? Well, we're admitting you to a law school that is an academic setting, so we are interested in how you have done in an academic setting and how that might translate to what we're doing here at our law school. So we also, though, understand that there may be instances, especially for non-traditional students, where it may be difficult, if not impossible, to get a substantive letter of recommendation from someone that maybe you had as a professor years or decades ago. Or maybe you have just not been able to feel confident in getting a strong letter from a professor in an academic setting at this point. as you prepare to apply to law school. And so you're getting maybe a letter recommendation from an employer or an internship supervisor or something like that. We understand there are instances where that happens and is necessary. And so my recommendation for that would be I would ask that recommender if he or she, when they write that letter for you, can maybe speak to things that would apply in a law school or legal setting. So, for example, ask if that recommender can speak to your abilities in writing, or if that recommender can speak to your abilities in reasoning and analysis. And by that I mean, for example, taking large amounts of information and being able to distill that large amount of information down to like a central core or theme. So if those recommenders that aren't academic recommenders, and maybe even those that are, can write to some of those traits and attributes that you have that will be translatable to law school and the legal profession, I think that's important. But really, like I said, pay attention to what law schools are asking for in recommenders, follow those instructions, and they are important. Like I said, we are very interested in how you have done in an academic setting.
Yeah, so I would, just echo the fact that generally speaking, your strongest letters of recommendation tend to come from academic or professional sources, and professional sources can be, more broadly speaking, beyond an employment setting. It could be somewhere where you've volunteered, interned, externed, volunteered. In fact, I would also add that I think a key component of the letters of recommendation is kind of going to Dean Grover's point about an evaluative piece, right? They're evaluating some kind of character trait about you that they can speak to. And I mention this because I see this particularly here from applicants in Utah, where we get a lot of letters of recommendation from folks who have heavy titles, right? They might be the governor of the state, they might be a judge, so forth and so on, which is great if they have evaluated and had an experience with you where they've overseen something that you're producing, something that you're contributing to their offices or their academic setting, right? I mention this because it's not uncommon that we're getting letters from, the neighbor who happens to be a judge or a medical doctor or what have you, when they've never observed this person in a place or in a capacity where they can speak to, how are they going to perform in an academic setting that's quite rigorous. They can't do that because all they know about this person are personal traits, like they're kind, which is great, or they grew up with their child playing soccer together. That's great, but they've not observed them in a capacity where they can really speak to their outcomes, how they work with others in certain settings. So that's the only thing I will add.
Can I? One thing I'll add again on. So for those of you who are like freshmen, sophomores, even juniors, or maybe even, I suppose, in your senior year, one thing that you can certainly be doing now and early on is looking at, for example, taking multiple classes from the same professor, trying to work as a research assistant or a teaching assistant for a professor, or even just visiting with a professor during their hours to learn more about them, because they're going to get to know you better. And ultimately, if you ask that professor for a letter recommendation, that professor will now be able to, I think, write a more detailed, evaluative letter on your behalf. I think there's also great benefit in just getting to know your professors outside of kind of the transactional nature of, I'm going to ask you to write a letter for me later. Maybe you decide not to go to law school, but you go to a different grad school, and having that professor who knows you and he or she can write that letter for you is a great thing to be able to have. So I would start doing, that's something you can be doing now, early on. I also get people asking, well, can I submit more letters? You asked for 2, can I submit 4? Because I have 2 professors, but I have an intern supervisor and I have someone else. We asked for 2. And so this kind of goes back to the instructions. That said, we're not going to throw a file away if there are more letters of recommendation. But I would generally say just stick to what the instructions are.
I mean, to that point real quick, I know of folks who will only read the first, like for instance, we only require one, but we'll accept up to three. I know of some folks in our industry who will only read the first two. If they only required two, they will only read the first two. You don't want us making that choice for you. You have to be very judicious and make your best effort to just follow the instructions.
So would you say then that you want the letter to include something about character, but also academic aptitude? Like both are important, or one more than the other?
I mean,
Or is that a bad question?
Yeah, I mean, I think about the application as the totality of the whole, right? What's supporting your application? And so it's not so much, I feel like it's independent to each applicant, and this is what makes it tricky, because we're trying to produce generalized information when you're treating this uniquely to you, right? And so what may be helpful, for instance, for Dean Grover, might be different than what's helpful for me in our submitting our applications to individual places. And I think that, that's why I mentioned the evaluative piece, because someone, for instance, that's been out in the workforce for 20, 30 years or what have you, the likelihood that they still have maintained contact with a faculty member that could speak to their performance in an academic setting is highly unlikely. And so, if they've been in the workforce or they're an entrepreneur, they have folks that can speak to their engagements with that person on a professional level, whatever that might look like. But Dean Grover.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think generally every letter of recommendation I've read will touch on character. So I think that's sort of a given. It really is that academic in classroom. How are they as a student? Are they collaborative? I mean, that's an important thing that some professors and recommenders that I appreciate will touch on. How do they do in a group setting? But then really just that academic piece, kind of that intellectual side is really important and is what we're looking for. I will just add, for those of you that have had experiences on a mission, unless your mission president was also a professor you've had, I would avoid that letter. I'm just going to be honest. I understand that maybe it can be hard to get letters, but going to what Director Moreno said, a letter from your mission president might tell me you're a good missionary, and that's fantastic. I applaud that. I'm more concerned about how you'll be as a law student, not as a district leader at the law school. So I implore and beg of you, if you can get another letter, do. Again, we'll read it, but someone saying she was a great missionary is just not as helpful, and you can probably find a better resource.
That's great. And I have to just interject and say, ask your recommenders for what you want and need in these letters. I get asked for letters all the time. I think don't be afraid to say, hey, and if you could include information about my academic abilities or my writing or whatever, just ask, I mean, a recommender is usually going to want it. They're doing it because they want to help you. So moving on to personal statements, I think I'll just sort of ask a two-part question here. What do you look for in a compelling personal statement, and how can applicants effectively convey their unique experiences or perspectives or whatever may be compelling about them in their essays?
So what I look for, and I'll just, this might be subjective, but I think it applies. So at our law school, you'll have 3 sets of eyes that read every application. In terms of the personal statement, we kind of leave that up to you. I remember when I was applying to law school, I almost wished schools would give me a specific prompt so I could answer the specific question and not be left guessing what they were kind of asking for. We aren't hiding the ball in that we want to know something specific, but we're leaving it up to you to guess what that is. So we're not doing that. But we really do, in a personal statement, what I hope to learn is something about you as an applicant that I haven't been able to pick up from the rest of the application. So, for example, we will see all your transcripts. I will have seen every class that you received college credit for and what grade you got. I'll see a resume, so I'll see generally experiences you've had outside the classroom. Maybe you volunteered at No More a Stranger Foundation or something like that. If in your personal statement it's essentially just a regurgitation of stuff that I've already seen. So, for example, if you're just talking about, I have a great work ethic and I've done really well in school and I got this GPA and I did well in this class, I will have already essentially known that from looking at your transcripts and looking at your GPA. Or if you talk about, here's a list of my volunteer experiences, again, that's great. I will have already been able to pretty much pick up the gist of that through looking at your resume. But if your personal statement, you talk about, here's a specific thing I learned at this volunteer experience that shaped why I want to do A, B, or C, well, then that wasn't something that I would have been able to pick up, and I would have learned about that, about you, just from that statement. Or here's something that I learned specific, here's what pushed me, or was the genesis of me wanting to have this volunteer experience. Well, that's something I will have learned only through that personal statement. So, just kind of zooming out a little bit, when we're reading files, kind of the baseline question that at least I'm asking as I read each file is, do I feel like this person, this applicant, if admitted, will be able to handle like the academic rigors of what we're doing at the law school? That is the most kind of baseline question, right? And so that question I'm looking at, well, how have you done on your admissions test, the LSAT? We also accept the GRE. And then also, how has one done in their grades? What's their grade point average? And it's not just looking at the snapshot of what the cumulative grade point average, we are looking at the context of the grades. Do we see an upward trend? Maybe someone has been working all through college. Maybe someone's a first-generation college student. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it, to grades. But then once I've kind of I'm satisfied that, okay, this particular applicant, I don't have any question about his or her ability to handle the academics here, then the question shifts to, well, who are we adding to this community at the law school? I think both the U and BYU, we're a little bit smaller in terms of the numbers that we enroll compared to some of our peer law schools. And so that question of who is taking a seat here, I think resonates maybe a bit more because we're only, for example, enrolling about 120 students. And so then it's, who is this person? What narrative, like Director Melendez spoke about earlier this morning, who is this person? What views do they bring with them? What experiences and viewpoints do they bring with them? And how will they contribute not only as students while they're here at the school, but then beyond as alums? And so I don't know that unless you really tell me about that. And so that personal statement is your opportunity to do that, and something that we're really keenly attuned to on our admissions committee.
Yeah, I would say I have very little to add to that. I think that's a really great summary. The only thing I think I could share is that this is, again, you're going to hear me say this over and over again. You ought to go back to the instructions. I know of some schools that give you up to 8 prompts to address in a personal statement. And it's also very common to see the broad, open-ended invitation for your personal statement, right? Which is more akin to what we have. So we leave it all up to you, right? So this is part of the calling, is use your best judgment to determine what disclosures you're wanting to share with the admission committee. I always tell folks, right, you have to remember you're producing this for the purposes of gaining admission into law school. How are these disclosures supporting that effort? How is it that I'm answering the why am I pursuing a legal career? And by this, we're not asking what you envision yourself doing 20 or 30 years down the line. That's unrealistic. Why? Because once you go into law school, you might find new passions, right? And you might be interested, or learn that you're more interested in this than you were in the original impetus behind your pursuit of, going to law school. And so that's what I can add to this, is just like, be very mindful of what you're sharing, be your authentic self, try to avoid humor, and we might differ in our opinions of that, but I could tell you more times out of not, it is very common that that's just not going to land well. You don't know your audience. So for instance, like I always use myself as an example. I don't love Seinfeld. I've not been able to sit through like one single episode because I'm just like, oh my God, I want to pull out my hair, right? Because I don't think it's funny, but like I know a whole host of other people who just think it's the funniest thing ever, which is great. But again, this is where your audience might differ, and it is subjective because you're having more than one person read your file. Find other ways to reflect your personality and your voice in your personal statement. Don't embellish, don't fabricate. It's unnecessary, and it's also dishonest. I share this because these are kind of some of the common pitfalls and mistakes I see applicants making in their personal statement. And I think that just sum it up there.
Can I just ask real quick, off script here, about how many, if you know off the top of your head, applications you received?
So last year we received close to 1,200.
We were a little over 600.
Okay. Good to know. So it seems to me like you can sort of read through a lot of, like for lack of better word, BS. But I mean, it sounds like when you read that many applications year after year, you are getting a good sense of who's being sincere and who's coming from a place of, I guess, like the seriousness of the endeavor that law school is, and their sort of willingness to participate in it in a way that's, law school's rigorous. It's hard work.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, so I can tell you, I was sharing this with some of y'all. Just me alone last year, I read over 800 applications. That was just 1 year. Multiply that by 8, right? And so what I can say is that, we all have a certain way we write, a way that we convey information, the way we speak. Right? Orally, both orally and in writing. And in writing, of course, when one does not know the person, we don't know whether what they're sharing is true or not. We take their word as true because that's what they're sharing. What I'm saying here is more of, it is, some stuff is just so out there. And again, I take it back to how is this supporting your pursuit of gaining admission into law school? That's what I take it back to. And I'm talking like, listen, I felt like there was a personal statement I read some time ago where I swear I thought I was watching one of the Fast and Furious movies. I was like, oh my God. What happened next? There was like a plane crash. It was like a whole thing. And it's not that I don't believe it. It's more of how is this relevant? And if I can't, as a reviewer, connect the dots, which I don't have to. Can I be clear about this? Reviewers don't have to connect the dot. You have to do that for us. This is why you're submitting your application and why you're being thoughtful about your disclosures. If I can't answer as a reviewer how this is, like, why I'm interested in pursuing law school, which is a very basic and standard question, there's a larger problem right? I feel like, this person might need some support, and that's not what law school, like, they should be seeking that support in a law school application. Does that make sense? Those are two different things.
I would add that so a number of schools will have optional statements and essays, right? We have one at BYU. I'd say maybe the biggest mistake I see applicants make is not take advantage of the opportunities to submit those optional essays. These are, again, opportunities for you to let schools know who you are outside of just like an LSAT score or a GPA. Like if you're a 180 and a 4.0, like maybe you can just say, hey, mic drop, here are my scores. This is all you need to know about me. But for the rest of us that don't have those perfect scores, and you really want to take advantage of every opportunity to let schools know what's unique about you and how you alone can contribute to their community. The last cycle, only about 37% of our applicants completed that optional essay. And I just thought that's just a swing and a miss on an opportunity to really provide a real complete application to the law school. One other thing on personal statements, I get asked a lot about like AI and use of AI as it pertains to personal statements. Pay close attention to each law school. Some law schools have very strict policies as it pertains to the use of AI and actual disclosures you need to make as part of your application as to whether you did or didn't use AI and what capacity you used it. So pay close attention to that. For BYU, we don't prohibit it. I view it as kind of like another tool, like a spell check. Again, with the caveat being, so long as AI isn't making up things for you. But pay close attention to that as you're crafting your personal statements and applying to law schools.
This is so great. Such valuable information. I love what you said about you have to connect the dots for us. And just all of this is just so great. So now shifting gears, how significant is the LSAT score in the overall decision? And are there any trends that you've noticed regarding the LSAT and the profiles of the admitted students? And if you want to touch on GRE and if you think it's important, then I'll leave that up to you as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the entrance exams, generally speaking, are going to be influential in the decision-making process, generally speaking. And you have to come to terms with that. It is important. If it wasn't, we wouldn't require it, although arguably the American Bar Association requires that we have an entrance exam. But I can tell you in speaking with colleagues, our colleagues across other schools, they're not, even if the American Bar Association were to abolish or eliminate the requirement for an entrance exam for as part of our admission process, I don't see anyone just jumping off and saying, no more tests. It's just, I can't see that happening, at least in the immediate future. And so it is influential in our decision-making process, and I think it is very important for at least, and I'm speaking specifically about the University of Utah, I think that I would be doing you a disservice if I wasn't being transparent about the reality that the LSAT carries a lot of weight, both for admission purposes as well as for merit on entrance scholarship consideration. Is it more important than the entirety of your application? I would not go so far as saying that, because it's the totality of your application. So in the instance of 4.0 180s, I could tell you that we've denied candidates with 4.0s and a 180 combination because they're just, yes, they've demonstrated academic aptitude, but in our applicant pool, so has 800 other people. And so in that instance, we're wanting to make sure that they took the care to submit, strong narrative pieces, that their letters of recommendation have positive things to say about the candidate. But I realize that may be going outside, just slightly outside the scope of the question. In terms of trends, I would have to, I've not taken the time just recently to look at the data, but I could tell you specifically for our school, the LSAT trend is going upward, right? So in the last 5 years, our median LSAT has gone up every single year. I could tell you that also as I'm processing applications, I'm seeing more high LSAT performance applications than I have ever before. So those are some institutional trends that I could speak to.
Yeah, so I think like the zooming out, the LSAT, yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with everything Director Moreno just elaborated for you all. The LSAT is, again, one piece in a holistic review, but it is an important piece. Now, why is it an important piece, I guess, is a question. The truth of the matter is the LSAT is designed specifically to tell law schools and test for skills that law schools and the legal practice has deemed important predictors for how one will do not only in law school, but skills that translate to the legal practice, right? So there is an LSAT score is one of the strongest, if not the strongest predictor of how one will do academically in law school. So it is, in a sense, apples to apples, right? You're not taking the MCAT, but then going to law school where you're never taking an organic chemistry course. The LSAT is testing on skills that we in legal education are deem relevant and important. So I think that at least helps me to be able to say this is why the LSAT is in one way so important, is because it will tell us how you will do in law school, and we're keenly interested in how you will do in law school. We do not want to admit someone to our law school who we feel like will be dismissed for poor grades, or who on their own will withdraw from the law school because they either don't feel like they're being able to keep up academically or whatever the case may be. So that I think is the first point to keep in mind, is that is why we do in some ways put a lot of weight on what your LSAT score is. On the GRE, we do accept the GRE. We pay particular attention to like the analytical reasoning and the analytical writing section. There's the quantitative reasoning section, the math, which often law school applicants don't do quite as well on. There's a reason why we're not engineers, many of us. And so we understand that sometimes that QR score can be a bit lower in the percentile, but again, we're paying close attention to those other sections, again, because those translate to how you're going to be doing in law school. Again, both our law schools have seen an increase in our median LSAT scores. So yeah, we are seeing a trend where we're seeing higher LSAT scores for those that are applying to our law schools. I would say also look at what a school's 25th percentile and 75th percentile scores are, because that will, again, give you a better idea of kind of the high end, but then also maybe the bottom end of those scores. And then I would say the final thing on trends, we obviously, I think both our schools really track how students are doing, not just while they're here, but then are they getting jobs, and then also important, are they passing a bar exam? And we have seen a correlation between lower LSAT scores having a disproportionate number of those folks who haven't passed a bar exam the first time and then maybe had to retake that. So again, that again goes into the calculus of who we're admitting on the front end. We don't want someone that is going to have a hard time passing a bar exam, because then we feel bad about that. What good is that legal education if they can't go out and then practice? So we are paying attention to that on the back end as well.
Well, especially when that legal education could cost a lot of money, right? Which leads to our next set of questions. What advice do you have for applicants concerned about the cost of law school and managing debt? And I'll just ask the next one and combine them. How do scholarships and financial aid factor into the admissions process?
So maybe we'll take the second question first. Scholarships and financial aid factor into the admissions process. So we don't have a separate application for financial aid or scholarships that you have to submit as part of your application. Everyone that applies to BYU law is automatically considered for financial aid and scholarships. Our scholarships at this point are generally all merit-based, meaning that we award those based on some combination of what your admissions test score was and then what your GPA is. We do, however, have a portfolio of 10 full tuition scholarships that we award each year to admitted students called the Achievement Fellowship Program. Those are full tuition scholarships awarded to students and applicants who have overcome significant challenges in their life to put themselves in a position to attend law school. So past recipients include students who have overcome or deal with significant health challenges, physical and mental, students who have had a criminal background, first-generation college students, survivors of domestic abuse, DACA recipients. So it really runs the gamut, and you can, as part of your application, submit a one-page addendum asking to be considered for the Achievement Fellowship and explain why. Zooming out a bit, one thing I commend this generation of law students for is really being attuned to kind of the financial cost of law school. And so I think, for each one of you, what you're looking for in your law school experience will differ. For some of you, it may be the name brand of the law school. For some of you, it may be the location of the law school. For some of you, it may be certain law schools that are known for routing its graduates into specific areas of the law. And then, you kind of work back from there. So, pay close attention. There are, information you can get about a school's average debt load of their graduates and see what that looks like. Also pay attention to the debt to income ratio that schools have. It may be that maybe there's a little bit higher debt a school has, but the average starting salary of their students is maybe a little bit higher. But kind of work back from there and really do your due diligence about what's available to students. We have very generous donors at BYU Law. We've been very fortunate to be able to offer scholarships to every one of our admitted students for the past 4 years, and I don't see that changing. But if for you, I had someone come to me that wanted to be on New York City at a white shoe Wall Street law firm, and that's what meant the most to them. And, I said, well, then being in New York and doing something that maybe causes more debt may make sense for you, and if that's what matters and that's what you want. But really being cognizant and doing your due diligence about what the school is going to cost obviously makes a big difference. And I'd say I'll stop that.
So in terms of advice, I do want to start by saying you do have Access Lex Institute here today. Please take advantage of them being here and the information that they'll impart. It's a not-for-profit financial literacy entity. I know that we're heavily engaged with them, and they provide like the MAX program to our students, and hopefully you learn a little bit more about that later on. But importantly, they have the Scholarship Data Bank, which is a national data bank of scholarship opportunities that you can apply for external to your institution. I know, in fact, the rep that's out there had shared that he had a student at a law school that applied to so many scholarships and was selected for them that they actually had to pay back some of that money or send it back because it paid for the entirety of his school, and so some of that funding had to go back to the scholarship entities. And so I just want to start by saying that because it is an enormous financial resource. Also turn to your local bars and see if there are any scholarship opportunities there. Sometimes there's specific things to either like your affinity groups, or even if you have a specific interest in a specific area of law, there are entities that provide scholarship opportunities, again, outside the law school. With reference to our scholarship process, your JD application is your application for scholarship consideration, and that's for merit on entrance. We have basically two application processes, and that's relevant to the scholarship question because the first is our early binding program. The early binding program guarantees scholarship that covers roughly about 50% of eligible tuition and fees to those who are admitted under that process. But again, it is a binding program, so you want to be very cognizant and very committed to enrolling in our program because you're signing a contract with us saying that you're going to do so if you are admitted into the program. By the same token, we guarantee that scholarship to those applicants who are admitted under that process. Under our regular admission process, awards typically have ranged anywhere between $8,000 to up to full tuition plus a stipend. It is a competitive process, right? So we base these decisions starting usually in January because we want to see what the admitted candidate pool shakes out to be, through that point, and then we extend offers basically through the end of March. It really just hinges on our merit is largely based on LSAT and undergraduate GPA. The only thing I want to also add is being mindful of trying to renegotiate your scholarships. You want to make sure you're using the right terminology, which is reconsideration. It's not that you're negotiating with us or anything like that. Let me be clear, with the University of Utah, there is no negotiation. There's very little instance of reconsideration. We're pretty set on the award that we extend to candidates. The only instance that we would quote unquote reconsider is folks who apply under our regular decision process they'll have a deadline. Usually it's in April. They are welcome to make 3 decisions. 1, accept our admission offer and our scholarship offer, and yay, they're coming. 2, do the opposite, which is decline both, and they've chosen to go elsewhere. And the third option is they maintain their admission offer, but they decline our scholarship award. They would do so in the hopes of maybe us entering into a second scholarship consideration process. I will say that's a very risky thing. Folks think that we're bluffing when we say that we have, a budget to operate under. And so when that budget's exhausted, we don't extend additional offers. We've had, I would say, in the last 7 years, I've seen every single year a student who ends up enrolling having forfeited the original scholarship that they were awarded because they thought they were very confident about our ability to enter into a second scholarship consideration, which sometimes we have, but what they're not taking into account is that we've also admitted other candidates since they've been admitted. And we might be more proactive about pursuing that candidate than perhaps the person who rescinded their scholarship.
Just add one final, be aware and look at schools, not just tuition number, but fees. There are sometimes thousands of dollars of fees that aren't included in a tuition fee figure. So just be mindful of that when you're exploring and looking at different law schools.
And just to be clear, that first year when they're submitting their applications, that's not the only opportunity for students to apply for scholarships. Is that right? I mean, like in your second year, could you qualify for a scholarship then, or?
I think that's going to depend on the school. So this is where you have to do your research. So for us, we have our merit on entrance scholarships. We also have need-based scholarships you can apply for first, second, and third year. You would have to be eligible to complete the FAFSA because you do have to demonstrate need. You would have to apply for that each of the 3 years because it's not a renewable scholarship. And then we also have a small bucket of funding for second and third year students. Those, you have to submit supplemental applications. But I want to be clear that we don't retroactively award a merit on entrance scholarship to a candidate that perhaps, performed extremely well in their first year. We have an award where that could potentially occur automatically, but very few students receive that because their existing scholarship actually makes them ineligible to receive that award.
We have a narrow, kind of a limited number of scholarship opportunities for second and third year students. Those are awarded primarily on academic performance, and you have to renew those each year. You can, with kind of the universe of off-campus scholarships, we call those, you're free to apply for those whenever, but those aren't administered by the law school, so that's kind of between you and the third party that's doing the scholarships.
I will add, you want to become familiar with the award that you're receiving. Make sure you know whether it's conditional, meaning that there might be conditions you have to meet to maintain that scholarship. If it's a renewable scholarship, understand what that looks like, understand whether it is in fact renewable. And so you want to make sure, again, here we're sitting down and reading through this information. Every single year we have a student that's surprised at how their scholarship operated, even though it's clearly outlined in their scholarship award. And so just be very mindful of that.
All right, so part of what UCLE aims to do is we want to keep legal talent in Utah, obviously, right? We want, if it's right for you, we want you to go to one of these 2 schools, stay in the state, make this place better. And so assuming all of you get into law schools here in the state of Utah, you decide this is right for you and you get in, can you tell the prospective students what sort of resources would be available to them to help them either prepare for law school or transition and succeed in this environment?
Sure. I think this is going to differ from person to person because everyone's starting out in a different place, both academically, professional, and professionally, but also on a personal level, right? We're all kind of starting in our own individual place. Generally speaking, for those of you who are still in your undergraduate program, taking courses that are going to amplify and enhance some of the skill sets that you'll need, both as a student and as a practitioner. But those things are going to be writing, oral advocacy, if you have an opportunity to do that, things like producing research. I'm not saying go out and, doing some kind of life-changing research out here. I'm just talking about like getting into the habit of producing research or researching, just because I think these are just some of the core elements of being a lawyer, among other things, right? I mean, there's like about other 40, 50 factors that we can all point to that are important to being a student and a lawyer. I mean, like time management, right? But those are some of the skills that we can't really fully assess wholly on your application. And in terms of once you're in law school, know that many of our law schools have an academic support program. We certainly have that. You can start engaging in that essentially before you even begin orientation. So if I take it back, right, you're admitted. One of the first things you're going to do as you transition into going into law school, we start our orientation programming typically in June. And that's well before you start in August, right? And so this is to kind of help ease some of those tensions, some of that anxiety to getting into, starting law school, and to introduce you to basic concepts that will help you as you enter into law school and learn those foundational skills of being a lawyer. But generally speaking, that's something I could share about our program. What the academic success program looks like at our school, first year students are going to have a teacher's assistant or a TA, right, for their legal writing program, as well as for just generally speaking law school, and they're going to be introducing concepts at the relevant time. So for instance, you'll start to hear things like outlines, right? We're not going to introduce you to the concept of outline starting in June because you don't even have a case book yet, right? So we're introducing that information to you when it's most helpful. How to prepare for, or recommendations for preparing for a midterm and a final exam. And allowing us the opportunity to introduce that information to y'all at the right time, because I realize, I'm already getting questions right now, right? Folks haven't even applied to law school yet, and they're already asking me, well, like, how can I prepare to just be a successful student? Let's focus on getting admitted first, right? And understand that we have this academic support program that is usually commonly incorporated into our law school setting.
Yeah, so for our admitted students, we have a pretty robust program that begins in the summer before you start. There are 5 different workshops. They start in the end of June. They're every other week. And it's introducing topics like, how do you read a case? How do you brief a case? What are you generally doing after class? The first workshop is just talking about the mindset that you need to have to succeed in law school. There will be a mock class where one of our professors will teach you, and you'll get introduced to what a law school class looks like and the Socratic method and things like that. So like the U, and I think like most law schools, we'll take great care to help you come in and feel like you're prepared to start the classes day one. I think the absolute worst thing one could do is when I get people asking, oh, I bought a contracts book. I'm starting to read contracts, torts cases already in the summer. I'm like, that is like the most counterproductive thing you could do. Do not do that. Like, prepare for law, like recharge, go to the ocean, the beach, go to the mountains, do something to charge your batteries. you'll have plenty of time to read cases once school starts, and we'll take care of that. But, you know, all of our law students is paired with a mentor that's a second or third year student that will be available to provide resources and guidance and assistance. Then we have academic support lunches, brow bags each month for students to kind of get reinforced on some of those ideas to do well in school. So I think all law schools, we want you to do well. We want you to graduate. We're not trying to weed people out. And so avail yourselves of all the opportunities that are available at whatever law school you attend to provide that support so you can do as well as possible.
And I have to say, I attended BYU Law School, and I benefited from that program, that mentor program. And it wasn't just my mentor, but my professors were very supportive. And I really do believe what they say, believe them when they tell you they want you to be successful, they want to keep you, they want you to pass that bar exam, and they want you to have a successful career. So I can sort of tell you that was my experience here as well. And so, you know, take advantage of it. And you today will get a chance to participate in a mock law school class with Professor Augustine Adams. So you'll get a little taste of what a law school class is like. Get excited. It's everyone's favorite. So moving on, what piece of advice, we have some time. What one piece of advice would you give to prospective law students as just like, what's your big advice? What's your final sort of thought you want to leave these guys with?
There's a law school for everyone. And I like to begin with that statement because your goal, go back to your original goal. Is the goal to be a student at school ABC, or is the goal to be a lawyer, right? You have to go back to that original goal. If the options that you really had your heart set on are not available, please continue to pursue that path where it might be a good fit for you. But make sure it is a good fit. Because I've seen a lot of unhappy transfer students from other schools that are coming into our school because for whatever reason, they may have just not been admitted or what have you as part of our process, maybe not admitted into BYU, what have you. I hate to start as a Debbie Downer, but it's not even so much that. It's the original goal is to go on to be a law school, like be a lawyer. It is not for you to be a student at any particular school, although I'm not saying dismiss that. Certainly, if you have your sights set on all of these schools, certainly go through the application process, but also understand and make a plan for what you're doing to get to your ultimate goal. That is my biggest piece of advice, because I want to see y'all doing the incredible things that you envision yourself doing, and don't let us get in the way of that.
Yeah, I'd piggyback a little off of that. So mine would be, I get asked a lot about timing. Like, do I need to apply early? When's the date I need to apply by? And in my mind, I kind of zoom out, and for me, the advice I'd give is go to law school when it's the right time for you. Maybe that's right after you graduate. Maybe that's 20 years after you graduate. Law schools, we're not going anywhere. We're going to be here, right? Your LSAT score, if you take the LSAT, it's good for 5 years. So you can take the LSAT now and you say, you know what, I got this great opportunity to do an internship. Or, you know what, law school seems like it would be good, but maybe I have some doubts. You don't have to apply 6 months after you take the LSAT, or a year after you take the LSAT, or 3. So law school is expensive for most everyone. It's extremely stressful, I think, for everyone. I loved law school, but it's rough. The first year is tough. And so don't feel like you have to go to law school at a certain point. Go when you feel like you can clearly articulate how law school is going to get you where you need to go. Be clear that law school is necessary for your professional outcome. Like, I talked to someone who wants to be a lobbyist, and I said, well, that's fantastic, but I don't know that you necessarily have to go to law school to do that, do you? And so, because law school is such a commitment, make sure you're ready to go when it makes sense and you know that that's what you want to do. And we are seeing one trend, I would say, and I've only been doing this for 4 years, but one thing I can already see is we're seeing more applicants who are applying that I guess you'd call non-traditional, where there are gap years, where they're coming to law school after having gone a different graduate degree or having had an entirely different career before coming to law school. That's fantastic. Because when you're clear and know that this is what you want to do, you're ready to make that commitment. And like Director Moreno mentioned, you're hopefully less liable to be like, oh, this is horrible. I'm either going to drop out of law school or I don't want to go. I want to go back to a different law school now or something like that. There's less chance of that happening. So, like I said, don't feel pressure to apply at a certain point. You're not going to be penalized or dinged because you're applying to a law school later than right after you graduated. And be sure that it's what you want to do and you're ready to make that commitment. We'll be here excited to receive your application whenever it comes in.
Those are both perfect places to end. So thank you so much. This has been really great. Thank you. Let's give them a hand. Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you. Okay, so before our next break and panel, I failed to sort of introduce Euclid, the host of the whole event, right? The architects, rather. The host is BYU Law School. And so I wanted to tell you a little bit about Euclid and what we do. So we are a nonprofit dedicating to making the legal profession more inclusive and representative. We have fellowships, scholarships, internship opportunities. In fact, you should follow us on Instagram if you haven't already. We post a lot of these opportunities and events and different things on there. I'm part of Euclid's board and the committee for this event, and a practicing attorney, and I can't tell you how much good Euclid does in Utah and in the legal community. It's just great, and hence putting together this amazing event, right? Follow us on Instagram. I think we have a Facebook. Yeah, there you go. All of the social things. And you have a little bit of a break before the next panel, which is Career Options in the Law, where you will get to hear from practitioners, people practicing law. It's going to be great. Bathrooms are that way. Snacks are that way. Be back here at 10:30. Thank you. Yeah,